Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Green Party of New York 2020 Presidential Forum. I'm Gloria Matera, one of the co-chairs of the Green Party of New York and one of the moderators for tonight, along with my co-moderator.
I am Peter Lavinia. I'm also one of the co-chairs of the Green Party of New York and a co-moderator with Gloria.
And before we start off, we'd just like to send our love and solidarity New York 2020 Presidential because we know Forum. This is a really, really challenging time, and we know that no one has not been touched by the pandemic, and sadly, the response from the federal down to the local. And I think more than ever, as you'll probably hear tonight on several occasions, why the Green Party is a home that you want to be in. Just some announcements. Well, first of all, tonight we have invited to the forum the three officially recognized candidates by the Presidential Campaign Support Committee of the National Green Party, Dario Hunter, Howie Hawkins, and David Rolde. Unfortunately, David did not accept the invitation. So tonight you'll be hearing from Howie and Dario. Just some quick announcements. Because the Green Party of New York is concerned about the safety of our members, we'll be having our presidential nominating convention as a virtual convention on Saturday, May 16th. And right now we are voting for our presidential preference vote by absentee ballot, postmarked by May 9th. So please go to gpny.org to get all that information, including an opportunity to get a ballot and cast your vote. We'd also like to say that the Green Party does not take any corporate donations, and so you can become a supporting member if you're an enrolled Green, or a sustaining member, make a one-time donation. And our new and exciting way to do that, besides at our website, is to text Green Future to 22525. That's Green Future at 22525. So we discussed with the candidates what we will be doing in terms of format. So we'll just quickly let everybody who's watching know that there'll be 3-minute opening statements. We did a really cool kind of random computer thing so that Dario will give first statement, then Howie, then there will be questions. There's about 9 questions. Peter and I will alternate every couple of questions, where each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer that. Then there will be an opportunity at the end for each candidate to ask the other a question, and then 2-minute closing statements. So I think we are about ready to start. So that, I think, as I said, Dario, 3-minute opening. Okay, Howie, we're going to have you do your 3-minute opening. Thank you for.
Okay. I think we're gonna hold on for a minute. Dario's having some connection issues. Okay, Howie, if you would like to begin.
Okay, thank you. It's good to be with New York Greens. I wish we were face to face, but as Gloria said, we're in the middle of this pandemic, and we're in a situation where we got a childlike dummy in the White House, and we got a guy with the megaphone who seems to be sitting on a park bench somewhere feeding breadcrumbs to pigeons. I mean, where the hell is Biden? You know, we need alternatives, we need answers, because people are getting sick and dying. So it's a real opportunity for the Green Party, unfortunately, under these circumstances. You know, we face a situation, thanks to our governor, that we got to get 3 times more votes than we got, to get on the ballot. And last time it would have took 155,000 votes. And the only candidates that ever got that much for the Green Party were Ralph Nader in 2000 and our ticket for governor in 2014. But I think we can do it. In fact, given the total failure of the 2 parties to deal with this emergency, I mean, we have something to say. So most of you know me. I'm a retired Teamster. The Greens have run me 4 times statewide against Hillary Clinton for Senate, and then 3 times for governor. We got the ballot line every time. And I'm running this race because a bunch of Greens around the country asked me to. And we came up with 2 basic goals. One is to put green solutions into the national debate. And I don't want us to be marginal. I want us to force these issues in. And the other is to build the Green Party. And that's how we get into the debate. So I'm leading with 3 life or death issues: climate, inequality, and this new nuclear arms race. The climate is the Green New Deal we started talking about here in New York 10 years ago, when Gloria and I ran for governor and lieutenant governor. And by the end of the year, we had 62 Greens sign on to a federal Green New Deal around the country. And that was our signature issue for the last 10 years. But the Democrats took the brand and diluted the content. I'm calling for an eco-socialist Green New Deal. We're going to have a public energy sector, transportation, and we're going to rebuild manufacturing through the public sector so that we can rebuild all our production systems for zero waste as well as clean energy. And so y'all know a lot about that. I'm going to go on to the next issue, which comes out of our Green New Deal, which always had an economic Bill of Rights. And that's dealing with inequality, which is a life and death issue. Working class living standard, life expectancies are on decline. So we're talking about the right to a job, an income above poverty, housing for all, healthcare, education, and a secure retirement. And the third issue is this new nuclear arms race. The last bilateral treaty between the U.S. and Russia on strategic arms expires next February 5th, and no negotiations are going on. And I'm the only candidate in any party saying we need nuclear disarmament initiatives. Pledge no first use, unilaterally disarm to a minimum credible deterrent, cut the military budget, bring our troops home, and on the basis of those tension-reducing initiatives, go to the rest of the world and say we want complete and mutual nuclear disarmament. And the party-building piece, I'm not going to have time to lay out because I'm out of time, but we'll get to it somewhere along the path here. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have Dario?
Yes, you do. Hi, Gloria.
Hi. Can we have your video? Is that a possibility?
No audio for now, but if we can proceed.
Okay. Go right ahead.
All right. First of all, it's such a pleasure to be a part of this forum. Thank you for inviting me. You know, I'm originally from the New York City metro area. I was raised in Newark and Jersey City, both subway rides away from New York City. And being sort of in that orbit means having a sense of some common issues and some common challenges. And my background is coming from a working poor family in Newark, raised in the projects. And for me, my ticket out was education. And I struggled to get through K to 8, to get to college, to get through law school. And that struggle very much informs the activism that I engage in. As a member of the Youngstown, Ohio Board of Education previously, but also my activism in various regards to try to help communities that are unfortunately disenfranchised, especially in urban areas, but really all across this country. The rural heartland is also greatly forgotten. And so that background, that experience as a person of color going through various kinds of challenges really colors, it really gives the sense of the motivation and mission behind what I do. Now, I'm in this race because I realized in my time in the Youngstown Board of Education fighting a nasty state takeover that a lot of the issues we were dealing with have to be dealt with on a national level. You know, the school to prison pipeline is a national issue. The mass incarceration system it feeds into is a national issue. And so our campaign has a straightforward answer to dealing with these issues. We have a full-throated platform in regards to the issues that affect this country's minorities, the People of Color Bill of Rights, for example, dealing with everything from police brutality to indigenous sovereignty to reparations to redlining. It was mentioned by my colleague that his campaign is the only one calling for nuclear disarmament. In reality, we're the only one calling for an end to the military-industrial complex, including nuclear disarmament. We're the only campaign calling for a Department of Peace to end the colonialism and imperialism abroad. We are the only campaign in the midst of COVID-19 that called for $2K per person, UBI, to give relief to Americans, everyday Americans, not just corporations, because we know everyday Americans are hurting. And we're the only campaign that called for no rent, no mortgage, no evictions, without a bailout for corporations. We are the campaign that is focused not just on the Green New Deal, but on the Green Path Forward, which is a much more comprehensive platform to ensure that we deal with the diplomacy piece of our global crisis, that we also deal with the other multiple environmental crises, such as plastic pollution, phosphorus and nitrogen pollution, and of course, with the effects of big ag on climate change. And so that background coming from New York City Metro and those challenges informed what we have as a full platform and campaign to deal with the issues that affect everyday Americans, but not just everyday Americans, human beings all across the world. And that is the focus point of our campaign. Our campaign is about ensuring that we can all work together in peace as humanity and solve the challenges we face in common.
Thank you. We're going to transition now to the question portion of this discussion. So, Dario, you will go first. As president, what actions and policies would you take to combat the COVID-19 crisis? And how would you help organize communities to fight back against the bailouts and planned austerity we have seen so far?
Excellent questions. You know, we have a very comprehensive plan on our website, dariohunter.com, and it includes such planks that other candidates would agree with, such as Medicare for all and nationalizing big pharma and medical supply, but it also includes some innovations that are unique to our campaign. I mentioned $2K per person UBI, no rent, no mortgage, no evictions without bailouts. I mentioned bringing peace and using those resources to help aid with crises such as this. Of course, we have to end the sanctions as well that are strangling other countries. We have to ensure fair elections, getting rid of those petition requirements that are going to keep people off of the ballot in the midst of this crisis. And we have to end internal immigration and let people out of some of our unconstitutionally crowded prisons, such as here in the state of California. Those are just some of the things that we would do. And in regards to fighting austerity, we have to have a strike, folks. People are talking about rent strike. We need a general strike, folks. We are long overdue for that. And this crisis has underlined the massive inequalities that our society faces. And it's time for not just workers, but all individuals to come together and unite, because solidarity is our power. And I think when we mobilize the political effort that comes forth from people realizing we've had enough, and this is one of the low points of our generation, then we can see the catalyst for true change. And that has to happen on the grassroots level. Green Party organizing has to happen within the party, but also without the party, alongside common cause organizations that are also interested in the same causes as we are, such as Black Lives Matter, various organizations fighting fracking, unions. There are a variety of organizations that need to come together on this effort to make this kind of mass mobilization happen. And we can come together to demand the changes that we deserve as a country. I mentioned in my COVID-19 plan, I also included a crisis tax for the 1%. What we need ultimately, this is just a stopgap. What we need is fundamental system change. It's good to talk about UBI, but UBI is only going to matter so much if we get rid of the existence of billionaires such as Bezos and Bill Gates. They should not exist in a fair and free society. The labor should belong to the workers.
Thank you. Howie?
Well, first thing is Medicare should pay for all the COVID testing and treatment and all emergency services right now. The Defense Production Act should be used to plan the production of the medical supplies and their distribution to where they're needed, and to roll out a real testing, contact tracing, and quarantine program so we can go back to work, not just as essential workers. Right now, they're sending us back out as sacrificial workers. We need a moratorium on evictions, rent, utility shutoffs. We should cancel the rent, mortgage, and utility payments and have the federal government pay those so we don't have a string of bankruptcies for small landlords, credit unions, housing cooperatives, and the like, and all the vendors that serve that industry. We need a temporary standard at OSHA that can enforce the procurement and supply of personal protective equipment so people can go back to work safely and they work safely. We should have $2,000 per adult and $500 per child for the duration of this crisis. And then to get out of this, that's where the eco-socialist Green New Deal comes in, because, you know, San Francisco Federal Reserve Bank came out with a study looking at recoveries after pandemics versus wars. We recover after wars because we blew up a lot of capital stock. Pandemics, 40 years of stagnation. Well, we need to destroy the productive systems that are destroying the planet and rebuild these clean manufacturing and other productive systems that are zero waste and 100% clean energy. And finally, we got to ensure we have an election everybody can vote in November. We need universal mail-in ballot system, and that's got to be done in the next few weeks. So that's where, you know, people going out May Day and striking, those are the kind of demands we got to raise, and it can't just be one day. And as far as austerity goes, I'll just talk about Cuomo. He's sitting on billions of dollars in that stock transfer tax, and he's cutting education, healthcare, and aid to our cities. We got to get out there and demand, keep those revenues.
Thank you. Okay, back to Dario. Second question. Scientific data points to the need to rapidly transition the economy from fossil fuels by 2030. How would the United States affect that transition under your presidency?
It's a great question. And I just want to point out in regards to the last question that our campaign is $2K per person, including for children, and that we're not going to pay back corporations. It's disingenuous to say it's just going to go to small mom and pops. I think that's really unfortunate to use public money for that. But in regards to dealing with the climate change issue, yes, we support the Green New Deal, and we need a just transition to get those oil and gas workers trained and working in new clean energy professions. That's going to be, of course, with governmental support and help and funds. We are going to, of course, improve the transportation grid to ensure we have clean energy fueled transportation. We are going to ensure that we switch over to 100% renewable energy by 2030, and the mobilization involved will create millions and millions of jobs in places like Youngstown, Ohio, where they are greatly needed as we improve the grid. There's been some movements in regards to clean energy so far. We've got to move quicker. And what's important is that our campaign, unlike any other, thinks of this on a global scale. So our presidency isn't just going to be aimed at what's happening in the United States. We recognize that a lot of our carbon footprint is outsourced to China. That's why they are the number one carbon emitter. And so what we have to do is have better relationships diplomatically with those countries and work on a global plan so that together in concert, we are engaging in efforts to completely revamp the energy industry in each of those countries. And I must point out, a lot of people focus only on energy. Transportation overtook energy in 2017 as a leading cause of CO2 emissions. And a big part of that has to do, well, at least a piece of it has to do with the Trump administration's ramping down of auto emissions rules. And so we have to have some tighter controls on that. We've seen under COVID-19 in LA in particular, the skies have got a little bit clearer because people have stayed home and not in their cars. We have to ensure that we are creating ways that people can get from point A to point B cleanly. And that means having a grid of clean transportation, which is also going to improve people's options in disconnected communities that have become food deserts, that have become disconnected from clinics and all sorts of local amenities. So we're going to do that interurban, but we're also going to do that within the cities as well. And this has to be a global effort, not just within the United States of America in terms of pumping money into communities to build up co-ops, but also across the globe as we work with other countries to do similar efforts in peace with those nations across the world.
Howie?
Well, I've detailed how to do this in an eco-socialist Green New Deal budget. It's a 10-year, $27 trillion program on my website, howiehawkins.us, and you can look at the details. But what we're talking about is a World War II scale mobilization, when the federal government took over a quarter of the manufacturing capacity of the country in order to turn industry on a dime in what they called the arsenal of democracy, to arm the US, UK, and Russia to defeat the Nazis. And we got to do actually a bigger scale this time to defeat climate change. So we're talking about a public energy system, the utilities, the generators, and the fuel corporations, Exxon, Mobil, Koch brothers. We're going to take them over and use their earnings from the sales of fossil fuels during the transition to put them into renewables instead of more fossil fuels. We're going to electrify rails, electric trolleys, light rails in the cities, bullet trains between the cities, and electrify freight and put most of our freight on the rails instead of the roads. I mentioned the manufacturing. We got to replace, for example, coke ovens with electric arc furnaces for steel. Cement is 5% of the world's carbon footprint because they throw calcium carbonate in there. We're going to have another way to make cement. We know how to do it. We got to phase out the old factories, put in the new ones. And we can go through all the technologies. Buildings, they all got to be retrofitted with heat pumps. So we're not using natural gas and heating oil. Agriculture has to be transformed to regenerative organic agriculture. Get rid of the biocides, put people back on the land, only working farmers, get rid of the corporate farmers. You got to be on the land if you're going to own the farm. Provide parity pricing so farmers can cover their production costs. And then in terms of the global Green New Deal, I think there's $2 trillion out of that $27 trillion we devote to that. That's essential. And what the U.S. has is a lot of wealth, a lot of universities and research institutes. We can provide a lot to a global effort. There's got to be multilateral. We got to help the global South leap out of the 19th century fossil fuels into the 21st century solar age and be the world's humanitarian superpower. and make friends instead of enemies by being the world's global military empire. So the Green New Deal can do a lot for peace with the planet and among ourselves.
Okay, the next question will be on foreign policy, and we'll flip the order and who speaks. How does your foreign policy agenda address the scourge of American imperialism and militarism? What would an American foreign policy look like under your presidency? And the first answer goes to Howie.
Well, the overall theme would be to be the world's humanitarian superpower and make friends instead of enemies. As the world's global empire with 800 foreign military bases, 7 official shooting wars, covert operations in over 100 countries, we cut all that out and just have a military. I want to cut it by 75% so it would defend our home territory and be available for multilateral action against aggression or genocide, but not occupying the world. The nuclear disarmament initiatives are crucial. As you know, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists has moved their doomsday clock the closest it's ever been to midnight. We're out of all these treaties. So, as I think I mentioned earlier, no first use, minimum credible deterrent, and there's a treaty for the prohibition of nuclear weapons that 122 nations agreed to 3 years ago. And the International Campaign for the Abolition of Nuclear Weapons got the Nobel Peace Prize for that. And hardly anybody in this country knows that because the presidential candidates aren't talking about it and the corporate media ain't talking about it either. I think that's an issue where the Greens can insert into the national debate and get people aware that this is a threat to us as much as climate change.
Thank you. Dario.
Thank you. And I just want to point out, in regards to the last question, we're the only campaign that's supporting solutionary rail, which is going to not just create a revolutionary transportation form, it's clean energy, but going to create conduits for clean energy to be transported across the country. Now, in regards to foreign policy, once again, we're the only campaign, folks, that is advancing the idea of a Department of Peace and ending the military-industrial complex, ending it. When we talk about dealing with a democratic deficit, the ways that parties like the Green Party are shut out, part of it has to do with money being pumped into politics. The military-industrial complex is a part of that. That's why we keep being fed all these ridiculous talking points about things like Russiagate, about things like Syria. 25% of what is a massive military budget is still a lot of money to be traded amongst people in order to keep the militaristic, the imperialistic, colonialistic project going. And they'll tell you it's peacekeeping, but don't they always say that? We're going to protect democracy. We're going to help democratic movements rising up in another country. And then you get another coup in a place like Bolivia, or you get an attempt to have a coup in Venezuela. These are the things that this country does and has done systematically. It must end, period. End of sentence. And we will do that. A Department of Peace will be a caretaker organization for our veterans who have been badly treated up to this point, and we will make sure that their service is honored. But we will no longer be engaging in imperialistic, colonialistic actions abroad. We will be working on peace building, and that means helping to improve quality of life all across the world, working with countries shoulder to shoulder as equals. And guess what? When we do that, we will re-earn the trust that we've lost progressively over generations in the international community, and we'll be able to work with other countries on important issues such as climate change. And we desperately need to do that, but at the present moment, when we are rattling the sabers, the rest of the world isn't interested in hearing us. That's typically the case when you invade countries and engage in, air quotes, regime change. I'm not for, as Neil Young would put it, a kindler, gentler machine gun hand. We need to end the military-industrial complex.
Thank you. Next question. With unemployment forecasted to reach 30% this year, what drastic steps would you take to address this crisis? And Dario, you're up first.
Well, I don't think the steps would be too drastic, but they'll be transformative. One of the ways that we'd be able to address that is through our transition to clean energy as a part of the Green New Deal. There's also a number of other things that need to be attended to and need to have investment on the part of our government, and that includes building up infrastructure. And by that, I mean not just roads and bridges, which are crumbling all across this country, but we have schoolhouses crumbling all across this country. There is plenty of work to be done. And if we weren't spending money to finesse corporate contractors that are doing it over in Iraq, we'd be able to get that work done here at home. And that's exactly what we're going to do. Guaranteed employment, folks. It is easy when you decide to reorient your resources away from imperialism and actually spend it on Americans, and we can do it. We have projected millions of jobs through the Green New Deal alone, and millions more will be available through a public works opportunity provided to Americans to help rebuild this country's crumbling infrastructure. In addition to that, we have to increase what some call workplace democracy, but what I would call workers' ownership of their own labor. And we do that by investing in co-ops, community co-ops to help build up a sense of community in urban areas, in rural areas, in disenfranchised minority areas. That will also help in providing resources such as food needed in desperately starving food deserts, and clinics, hospitals we need in places that are underserved, okay? So there are a lot of areas of need. What we need to do is invest in the building up of cooperatives so that not only can we put strength to these communities, but we can also ensure that people have ownership over their labor and an ownership over rebuilding their own neighborhoods.
Thank you. Over to you, Peter.
I think Howie has got to answer this question.
No, it's fifth question. Is there a new question?
Oh, I don't think Howie got a chance to respond to.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, that's my fault. Okay, Howie, do you need me to read it again since I diverted a little bit there?
No, it's about unemployment and jobs.
Yes, absolutely.
And as part of the Economic Bill of Rights I'm advocating an enforceable right to a job. And what we need to do is what was proposed, and as we came out of World War II with the full employment bill, and it became just the employment bill. And it was sort of Keynesian stimulus, not the right to a job. And we had another chance in the 70s with the Howie Hawkins bill. It got diluted, so it became the same thing. The Fed was supposed to balance fighting inflation and unemployment. But with an enforceable right, it would be like the Works Progress Administration during the New Deal expanded to a scale. So instead of going to the unemployment office when you can't find a private job, you go to the employment office and say, I want my job. And the local community has organized public service projects and public works projects or infrastructure. And they plug you in, and maybe you need training. That should be available too. Like WPA, it would be 10% local funded, 90% federal. You want that local funding to get rid of boondoggles and get real investment from the local community buy-in. And so it'd be an enforceable right. And there's legislation pending that Philip Harvey, who's helped us in the past, write our national platform on this issue, has worked with John Conyers, and I forget who's carrying it now. So that's something on the agenda, the job guarantee, that if we're not in the race, is not be talked about. Joe Biden certainly is not. And then my Eco-Socialist Green New Deal budget. If you go through that, we figured out how each investment, how many jobs it would create. 38 million jobs. And before this coronavirus depression, I was saying the bottleneck to get this transition done in 10 years was labor. But now we got mass unemployment. We've dropped further than we did in the Great Depression. I mean, the projections are unemployment above 25%. Somebody predicted, one of the, I think, investment banks predicted 32%. So this is how we're going to put people back to work as we come out of this depression.
Thank you, Howie. And this question will start with you. Socialism has recently become a factor again in American electoral politics, and the Green Party includes eco-socialism in our platform. Do socialist theories influence your politics, and if so, how? If not, how do you describe your perspective and policies in relation to socialism?
Yeah, I've considered myself a democratic and ecological socialist since the 1960s. And to me, what it's about is economic democracy, which has to be based on social ownership and democratic administration of the major means of production. If you don't do that, if you do like Bernie Sanders and tax the billionaires to fund your social programs, the billionaires still got the economic power. And that translates into political power. And they can resist and roll back the social programs. That social ownership and democratic administration gives us the power to make sure we can meet people's needs within ecological limits. And what socialism also does is it ends exploitation. where the owners steal what you produce. You get a fixed wage, and all the surplus value you create, the owners take. That's organized theft. They're stealing from us. And so socialism means you get the full fruit of your labor. Socialism also means instead of competition for profits and growth, which creates a dynamic within the world economy of endless growth that's destroying the planet, we can have planned production to produce what we need within ecological limits. And that competition extends from the economy into the relationship between countries. So you get inter-capitalist or inter-imperialist wars. And if we're going to have peace in the world, we got to have socialism, which is based on solidarity and cooperation instead of competition for cheap labor and resources and markets and geopolitical military advantages. So that's what socialism means to me. And I think the other thing I would say is I am of the wing that it shouldn't be centralized, it should be decentralized. We federate from the grassroots up. We should have citizen assemblies in our neighborhoods and towns. They make the basic decisions, elect their leaders, and then the decision-making goes from the bottom up rather than from, a central bureaucracy. So that's, to me, is what democratic and ecological socialism is.
Thank you, Howie. Dario?
Socialism is the ability of workers to own their labor and the distribution in an essential textbook definition sense. But it's so much more than that to me. It really is about communities having ownership and sharing amongst themselves the basic necessities of living. And that's very essential to my policies and the way that I present them, because they're oriented around cooperatives and cooperation, not just with multiple countries all across the globe, but also within communities. And I believe strongly that's how we're going to build up communities and how we're going to move this country forward, because what we've been doing so far doesn't work. Leaving people to the wolves of capitalism and corporatism doesn't work. And with all due respect, I'm disappointed that I'm the only person in this forum that has mentioned as a part of dealing with the unemployment issue, workers' cooperatives, minority community cooperatives. This is how we have to move forward. It's a socialistic way of moving forward. And also reparations, because that was labor that was stolen from people. And it is a debt that has to be repaid. And so when we talk about all of these issues, talk about reparations, talk about how we're going to employ all these people who are left unemployed, people without food, without water, without housing. It's a major crisis here in California. Socialism has the answers to all of these things. And the answers include not just workers and society at large owning labor and distribution, but taking care of every part and every piece of society rather than leaving it to corporate endeavor. We are not going to bail out corporations because corporations are not human beings. Our citizens are. And when we have people dying on the streets, when we have people living in tent cities in California, we have a crisis that is a genuine threat to any sense of what we call democracy. We don't really have one when that's the case. And so what we have to do is ensure that not only we provide what some would call workplace democracy and the ability of workers through that unemployment office that the government provides to have a job that they have control of the labor over, but also for them to be able to rise up out of communities that have food deserts, that have housing crises, that have lack of access to healthcare, that have a lack of access to basic necessities such as water. Socialism provides the answer to those issues, and we should not be afraid of solving those issues because we've been suffering from them as a country for a long time.
Thank you, Dario. So the next question will also go to you, Dario, first. If you are chosen as the nominee, how will you support down ballot green campaigns?
That's such a great question because we're already supporting down ballot campaigns. We have a campaign called #SeeGreensLead, and we've endorsed multiple local candidates. And I believe very strongly whatever little amount of attention I get from running in this race really has to be funneled down to the local races, because I believe, as someone who has been a green in public office, as a member of the school board, the only person in this race for whom that's the case, I believe that people getting to see green leadership gives them that spark of the sense of what can truly come about through the Green Party in their neighborhoods, in their local areas. So I've been supporting wonderful candidates as far in the field as Minnesota, Pennsylvania, Utah, and I'm very proud to do so. But we also needed some on-the-ground organizing. We need some party building. We need to get out of our comfort zone as Greens and go to organizations we never connected with before. Yes, the common cause organizations like Black Lives Matter and anti-fracking groups, but also even organizations such as churches, which is where I would go when I campaigned in multiple campaigns, because the Democratic Party is already there. People want to see you where they're at. And when you meet them and connect with them, then we build the building blocks that bring more people in. We also need to be more media savvy as a party. And as a member of the Board of Education, engaging with the media was an important aspect of what I did. And I got probably more attention than anyone else on that board because of it. We need to engage as a party with strategies to teach each other how to engage better with the media, how to engage better with the community, and to spread that positive energy throughout the party nationwide, in addition to supporting our local candidates, not just in their communities, but on the part of national candidates as well. And I want to say that doing so really gives a leg up and a lift up to more Green candidates in areas all across this country. You know, I've talked to some of the candidates that I've supported, and they felt really encouraged by having that positive energy, having somebody who's willing to go to bat for them. And I think that's one of the things that the presidential nominee is important for, making those down ballot candidacies shine in this race. And if you're not doing that, you're not taking the full advantage of what this campaign can provide.
Thank you, Dario. Howie?
Well, I'm helping down ballot candidates, first of all, get on the damn ballot. You know, in this coronavirus environment, you know, we had the nonsense here in New York where the leadership of the Democratic Party tried to knock our candidates off, saying the petitions weren't valid, but the Board of Election couldn't inspect them because of the coronavirus, and they went to court. I mean, so we pulled together a team of lawyers to help states get on the ballot. And in those states where we get on the ballot because we've been on the ballot for president a bunch of times, but they still want petitions down ballot, you know, like Jimmy Cooper down in Georgia and other people, we're helping them as well. So that's the first thing. You know, I'm open and I've done joint statements with candidates. Like Madeline Hoffman in New Jersey, we did a statement about demilitarization being so important to the Green New Deal and climate change, the battle against climate change. And we're planning to do another one on nuclear disarmament. And then, you know, I've been attacked by Noam Chomsky and Bill McKibben a couple of weeks ago. And this week, that Professor Dreyer from LA and The Nation saying, you know, get out of the race or at least run safe states. And what I'm telling them, and this is because every state is a battleground for the Green Party. You know, in Pennsylvania and Ohio, they're fighting fracking. It's not the Democrats. We're fighting the Democrats on affordable housing, on police brutality, and then in this bloated military budget and all the foreign wars and coups we're involved in. And the Democrats are on the other side. And, you know, I'm trying to give support to our down ballot candidates because they're getting the same crap from, you know, their local Democrats. So those are some of the ways I'm helping. And as I've been saying, if we're going to become a major party and force in American politics, we got to build it from the bottom up. We got to elect thousands of Greens going into the 2020s at the local level, then state legislatures and Congress. And then when we have a presidential ticket and we got a Green caucus in Congress, they won't be able to ignore us. And the people will think, hey, they got in Congress, why not the presidency?
Thank you.
Thank you. Next question. Education policy in the United States, especially in urban areas, often centers on school choice, charter schools, and the closure of allegedly failing schools after students score poorly on standardized tests. What does your education policy look like, and how does it contrast to the neoliberal model? And first answer goes to Howie.
Well, at the federal level, which led the effort of charterization, high stakes testing, we got to reverse that. So we're not forcing this on the local communities at great expense. The federal government should kick in a lot of money for schools so it's not dependent on the property tax so much, which is inequitable between districts. So we have equitable funding. And then the federal government has laws they have not enforced about desegregation, or the courts put in roadblocks and Congress does not respond. So we have more segregation now by economic class, which corresponds a lot with race, than we had in the 1960s. It's been getting worse. We kind of peaked at desegregation in 1980, and we've been going backwards ever since. And that is something else that the federal government can provide leadership on. So I think, you know, a Department of Education can provide leadership and resources, but the decision-making should be locally elected school boards. We got to resist mayoral control and state control, which is not about improving the schools. It's about paving the way for private school, charterization, privatization, high stakes testing, and basically denying the resources to poor schools where the students are performing poorly because they're in a poor situation on those high stakes testing. So I think those are some of the things the federal government could provide leadership on. And, we fought that here in New York against Cuomo and them with their charter schools and their high stakes testing and Common Core and all that nonsense. And we got to take that to the federal level.
Thank you. Dario?
With all due respect to my colleague, as someone who has experience in education, as a former educator, as a former member of the Youngstown Board of Education, I believe my colleague fundamentally misunderstands the source of the problem. The federal government can, of course, provide more money. It can pump more resources in, and more resources would definitely be welcome. But the problem is ultimately that you have the state preempting the ability of local communities to be able to have say and control over their community. And they're doing that so they can bring in corporate contractors to make money off of the kids. And those resources you pump in are being sucked up by corporate contractors who thrive like vultures off of their failure. We need laws to prevent that. We need laws on the books to prevent the kind of state preemption and taking away local control. We need laws to prevent the ability of these corporate vultures coming in and taking away resources from our children who in the Youngstown School District, some will go home without school books, with all of the money swimming around in that district. What we need also is to, of course, to deal with the charter school problem and to end this wild, wild west of charter schools, which in Ohio is definitely the wild, wild west. But we also need to end the school to prison pipeline. The school to prison pipeline is fostered and created by this managed failure. The states affected are managing the failure of these school districts in minority areas to ensure that these kids get pumped into a mass incarceration system where they're then used for cheap or free labor, i.e. slavery. And unless we have laws that strictly deal with this, unless we have a Justice Department willing to go for the jugular on these specific issues, for schools, going to bat for children in schools where they've come to my school board meetings and said, we feel like we are already in a prison. Unless you're willing to tackle that, then don't come at me talking about you are going to deal with education, because our children are genuinely hurting. And the money you say you're going to pump in from the federal government, there's a million vultures in various states sucking that money away. And let's talk about the teachers who are underpaid too. In Youngstown School District, with all the money being pumped in, you got starting salaries about $31K. Pitiful, absolutely pitiful. So we need work across the board, and we need to be real about what's really happening on the ground in urban districts, rural districts, and everywhere in between.
Thank you. Okay, next question. There has been an uptick in conversations around reparations for African Americans. Do you believe in giving reparations? And what do you think reparations look like in 2020? Who should receive them and what should they receive? So Dario will start off and then Howie.
All descendants of African slaves should receive reparations, and that will involve, of course, a personal payment. But it can't just be that, because frankly, there is no amount you could write on a check that could, quote unquote, pay me back for the suffering of my ancestors. And I speak that personally as a descendant of slaves. I can trace my roots back to slaves in Covina, Georgia, and in the Raleigh area in North Carolina. But we have to deal across the board with the atrophy that exists, unfortunately, in communities of descendants of slaves that is managed and created by 400 years of not just slavery, but also discrimination, Jim Crow, and the ongoing racism of various regards, educational racism, environmental racism, employment racism. So we must fund programs that provide education, minority communities, and improve the educational options. We must fund community co-ops to build up a sense of community. We must end the food deserts in those communities. We must build clinics and hospitals in those communities where they do not exist. We must deal with the fact that we have to put more effort and energy into higher education to ensure that we get more minority students in and that they complete. We have to ensure that we get more minority students in and through completion for specific programs, particularly medical, where that's needed. We understand that there are certain doctors, and studies have shown that doctors do not give the same pain medication to minorities, to Blacks, as to white patients. Abhorrent. But part of that is the lack of people in that profession who can speak to the experience. And we definitely have some wonderful Black physicians and medical professionals, but we need more. We need more, and that means investing in the educational track to ensure that we can get that. So we need investment all across the board, folks. And it would help if we also invested in community control of policing so we didn't have genocide happening on our streets, killing young Black people. That would help as well. We have to invest in that as well. So reparations has to be across the board.
Thank you. Howie?
Well, I think the next step on reparations for African Americans is passage of H.R. 40 to set up the commission to study how to do reparations. We haven't heard in an organized way what the African American community wants from reparations. And reparations is not just about slavery. Of course, it's about that and Jim Crow and discrimination. It's about all those homes that were stolen after the Great Recession by these corporate criminals that stole half of Black America's wealth. That's in the last decade. So we need to, figure all that out and come to the totals. And then the question is individual versus collective reparations. And I think this should come out of the commission, but I believe you need both. Black American families' wealth is about 1/10 of white American families. They could use the money right now for a lot of things. But collective reparations, that was the first thing that the modern reparation movement did when James Forman went to Riverside Church and demanded the church and synagogues fund Black newspapers, TV stations, radio stations, and a research institute. Because he understood, and the movement he represented understood, that if you leave institutional racism and capitalism in place, and you just give some individual reparations, the system is going to suck that money back up into the hands that exploited Black labor in the first place. There are other people who need reparations. Indians. Indian treaty rights need to be honored. There's land that was stolen needs to be returned. There are services and treaties say are supposed to be provided that are not being provided. Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo for Mexican-American land rights in New Mexico have been violated. And then finally, something we've talked about in New York, to deal with this war on drugs, which has ravaged particularly poor communities of color, we need Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where people can speak to what happened and what they need to do to repair the damage to their communities.
Thank you.
Thank you. So next question. What is your vision for how to grow the Green Party to be a viable alternative to the corporate duopoly? And we'll start with Howie this time.
Well, first thing is ballot access. One of the things we can get out of a presidential campaign is more ballots for the next election cycle, which makes it easier for our local candidates to get on a ballot and compete. And in about 40 of the 50 states, the vote for the presidential candidate determines whether we have a ballot line going forward. In New Mexico, it's 0.5%. Most states are 1%, 2%, or 3%. Alabama's 20%. That's going to be tough. But we can get a lot more ballot lines. So that's one thing. We need the resources to do that. So I think, my campaign's closing in on getting federal primary matching funds. So basically double the amount of money we raise, which we can put back into ballot access. But the most important thing is we can't build this party out of a celebrity. There's no shortcut. Even 6 months of a real good campaign, we got to organize, not just be activists. We got to be a palpable presence in the communities that right now are alienated. They're not apathetic. They're alienated from the two-party system. They vote in low numbers. Working class communities, communities of color, and young people. And they need to know, they don't need to know who we are because we've listened to them and talked to them and built relationships. And we're reliable and trustworthy. And when we do that, those people will come out because we have a program that, speaks to their needs. So we got to build it from the bottom up. We got to go out and organize. And a presidential campaign can be an augment to that. But if we don't go out and organize, we're just playing. We got to organize, and then we really need us paying dues so we can hire field organizers to support the organizers. I mean, are we serious or not? We're dealing with the world's second most enthusiastic capitalist party, the Democrats, and the most enthusiastic capitalist party, the Republicans. The Democrats are the oldest party, and they are the richest parties in the world. So if we're serious, we got to fund ourselves like trade unions fund themselves. Union dues raise about $10 billion a year in this country. The Green Party should be thinking about getting to that scale. And Bernie Sanders showed us how to do it. A lot of people give it a little bit.
Thanks, Howie. Dario?
Thank you. You know, it's important to focus on ballot access. And when I was a public official in the state of Ohio, we had ballot access and then we lost ballot access. And, you know, this was despite all of the hard work of the Ohio Green Party, but that happens when you don't have as many people on board. You have to keep the people. And the party has a tendency to sometimes go through boom and bust periods. You know, we're experiencing a little bit of a boom now post, you know, Bernie's withdrawal. But what we have to do is we have to find a way to keep people. The way we keep people, one of the many ways, is that we get out there and actually do things that align with our values. And in my community as a local leader, that's what we endeavored to do. Connect with common cause organizations, give people a reason to want to be on board and stay on board. Talk to people about the things that matter to them rather than talking at them. In a community like Youngstown, Ohio, that's vitally important because you may be talking to people who are interested in the Green New Deal, but it isn't their first thing. They may be dealing with the fact they just got laid off from the Lordstown GM plant. They may be dealing with the fact that their kid has homework they can't help them with because they don't have a school book to take home due to the failing schools. You want to reach people where they're at. And when you reach people where they're at, that's when you get people who come and stay. And you need to think out of your comfort zone. You need to think out of the box. And we have to go and reach out to segments of the community that haven't been quite as well represented in certain green locals. I get the question all the time, particularly in Ohio, are there going to be people there who look like me? And that comes particularly from African-American voters. And we have to make those inroads that we haven't made. It's all well and good to talk about it. And it's all well and good to talk about the issues that we believe support those communities. But if we don't have them at the table telling us what those issues are and what their perspective is, then how are you going to build a party that actually reaches out to people and grows in policy as well as in numbers? So we have to get beyond the boom and the bust. And I mentioned earlier some other party building strategies. Of course, we need to engage in training sessions and workshops to improve our media savvy, to improve our local organizing, to improve the way that we engage in outreach, because I've worked with some great green warriors, but the same green warriors aren't always necessarily the best or the most skilled people to get out there and engage and do purposeful outreach. That's okay. Training can help with that, but we have to take those steps. And we have to also acknowledge that in some locals, we've had a little bit of a static situation where we have longtime green warriors who stay in the same place, and we need new growth.
Thank you. So now we're going to move to a kind of the open question of the night, where we're going to allow each candidate to ask the other candidate a question. So Dario, you will be able to go first here and ask Howie a question.
Okay. What is your position on Syria and the conflict therein?
The U.S. should not be involved militarily or through covert operations, never should. I believe what kind of government Syria has is up to the people of Syria. So Trump should get those troops that is now guarding the oil fields out and let the Syrian people, decide the fate of their government. The U.S. should diplomatically try to engage in the efforts to get a ceasefire and come to a political solution. And the U.S. has stepped away from that. Russia, Turkey, Iran, and Syria are in negotiations, and the U.S. is absent. And they're sitting there on those oil fields like they got leverage, but they're not talking, which is, that's Trump. So the U.S. should get out militarily, engage diplomatically, and try to bring help. And then right now, we should be appealing to the countries that are blockading the refugees up against the Turkish border in Idlib and the Kurds in Rojava. They can't get relief for this COVID situation. They are sitting ducks. And the UN won't go in without the permission of nation states. So that's an area. And then also right now, there are millions of refugees. We should open our country to a lot of them. And we should urge Europe to do the same because they're blocking, they got a wall like Trump wants a wall. And that is just a crime against humanity. We have the biggest refugee crisis coming out of Syria since World War II. And those people need to be taken care of. But, the first thing the U.S. needs to do is get those last troops out and stop the covert operations and leave what Syria is up to the Syrian people.
Thank you, Howie. Now this is your chance to ask Dario a question.
So Dario, what prompted you to run for president in the first place?
Well, I kind of got into that a little bit in my introduction. I'd served as a member of the Youngstown Board of Education, and I was just so fed up with all of the things happening in our district, the mismanagement, the disappearing funds, the lack of resources making their way to students, and all of the corporate vultures that were stealing money away from them to make profit off of their failure. And it seemed like it was an issue that extended not just to Columbus, but it's a nationwide issue. We are seeing this happening all across this country, to urban districts all across this country. And it really is a crisis in educational racism. The district that I served is 70% Black and 14% Latinx, and overwhelmingly students of color. And it became clear to me, especially under this current climate where you have Betsy DeVos and her ridiculousness, it's absolutely clear that this is a strategy on a national level, not just to make money off of children's failure, but to pump into the school to prison pipeline and make money off of it further. So it requires solutions on a national level to not just wipe clean that targeting of Black children, but to also deal with the other associated issues like our mass incarceration system and the use of that for slavery. In effect, that's really what it is, the new plantation system. And so that struggle, those 4 years of fighting in that community, fighting state powers, suing some of those governmental agencies, really motivated this effort to take this struggle national. And I would say my approach to those issues, that's also my approach to each and every one of the issues that I deal with on a national level. A very full-throated defense of people's rights, a very full-throated defense of whatever is going to ensure people are treated most fairly, and an effort to end every single form of racism in every way that it rears its ugly head, whether environmental or educational or employment, in terms of revamping the EEOC and making it actually effective to protect people's rights. So that's really what motivates me, ensuring that we get the solutions everyday Americans need, regardless of their background.
Thank you, Dario. We will now move into closing statements. Since Howie went first with the opening, Dario, you will go first with your closing statement, and you will have 2 minutes.
Okay. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate this opportunity. I think the distinctions have been made very clear here. I consider myself an eco-socialist, and I'm very full-throated in that statement. And that's why I'm supporting not paying corporations with the existing high rents in the midst of this crisis. We're going to help relieve the American public in the midst of COVID-19. Okay, we're going to ensure that when we restructure the system, that workers will own their labor. We are going to support efforts towards a rent strike and a general strike. Okay, this is what is important to me, putting power in the hands of the people. And I mentioned some key distinctions in policy: Department of Peace, ending the military-industrial complex, our People of Color Bill of Rights, which you can learn about in more detail at dariohunter.com. The fact that we are supporting efforts to go after big ag for its effects on climate change in our comprehensive green path forward. And the fact that we were the first campaign to say $2K per person UBI. And I'm very glad we showed leadership on that, and the Hawkins campaign came on board and we moved them a little further to the left. That's what we're here for. We are here to take America, not just towards the left, but towards a space and a place where we can genuinely value every human being's contribution, and they can have genuine democratic say and choice over their futures, whether it's in education or in terms of in the environmental issues affecting them in their backyard, or it's in terms of their employment. We are here to support everyday Americans. You can learn more about our campaign at dariohunter.com, where you can choose to volunteer. And we wish money wasn't in politics. We want to end corporate bankrolling of politics, but every little bit that you can offer through our website would help. You can also get in touch with us there. And I look forward to hearing further questions from people who are energized by this debate. And I look forward to further engagement with, as we mentioned, future Green candidates down ballot, so we can energize local communities about having local debates about all of these issues to ensure that we come out of this crisis stronger and with a greater sense of solidarity to deal with the democratic deficit, the corporate control of this country, control on the part of the oligarchy, and to see our way towards a country where corporate money and people power has control, not corporate money.
Thank you, Dario. Howie?
Well, just to be clear, I support the cancellation of rent, mortgage, and utility payments by the households that have to pay them. But I want the federal government to pay those bills, so those businesses that rely on those payments are ready to go when we go back to work. Half the jobs in this business in this country are dependent on small businesses. And half of those small businesses didn't have enough money to last a month. And when you're a small business and you run out of cash, you're dead. Those businesses, those jobs are being destroyed right now. Ilhan Omar's bill in Congress does provide for those kind of payments instead of having households pay it, the federal government pays it for this emergency. And I'm sticking with that program because I think it'll keep the economy in a better shape. So, look, we're in a situation where Bernie Sanders has twice tried to reform the Democratic Party using a lot of things we've been talking about for a long time. Medicare for all, Green New Deal, an economic bill of rights, medical and student debt relief, and so forth. And Biden is opposed to all those things. The only way for those folks to continue is to support our campaign through November and beyond. And we got to tell them, don't get lost in the sauce. You vote as a Sanders socialist for Biden, and they don't know you're a socialist. You vote for the Green Party, you know what we stand for. And we got to tell them, don't waste your vote. Make it count and make them come to us, like when we got 5% in 2014. Cuomo had to come to us. We got a ban on fracking. We got paid family leave. We got a $15 minimum wage. That's what we got to have as an objective. So that's my pitch. And I think that's the pitch we got to make to the broad progressive masses here in New York. And we got to stick it back up Cuomo's ass. We're not going to get knocked off the ballot. We're going to get enough votes. And I'm asking for your vote in this Green Party primary. Thank you.
Thank you, Howie. I'd like to thank both candidates for participating in this conversation tonight, Dario and Howie. I'd like to thank the audience as well of Greens who are watching right now. I think that it's, this is a trying time, but I'm glad that we were able to have this conversation and that we are still having a primary, unlike some other parties in New York State. I'd also like to extend thanks to Michael O'Neill, who's been handling the technical aspects of this, making sure that this went off smoothly. So thank you. I'd like to let people know that we have an absentee postal ballot going on for presidential preference. So if you would like to vote, you're a Green, you'd like to vote, you have until May 9th to postmark your ballot and send it in to us. And you can get that ballot at gpny.org on our website, gpny.org. And the week after that, May 16th, we're going to be having a virtual convention. So there will be information on the website and social media about that. So please, like us on Facebook, on Twitter, and look at the website, and there'll be information coming up, get on our mailing list. I would also, encourage you to go out and spread this debate around on social media. Let people know that they can still watch it. It's going to be on YouTube. It's going to be on our Facebook page, obviously. So one other thing we talked about in the beginning is, you can help us build the Green Party here in New York by making a donation, by helping us be able to actually run candidates this year. We're running candidates at the state level and the local level as well. You can text Green Future to 22525. If you want to make a one-time donation, you can also go to our website, gpny.org, to become a sustaining dues-paying member, so that you can pay, kind of according to your income each month, so that we can have a sustaining base of members to build the party and to build that green future, that grassroots democratic eco-socialist future to fight the corporate duopoly and to build that better future for everyone. So I'd like to thank everyone again. I'd like to thank Howie, I'd like to thank Dario, and have a good night.
Night, everyone.
Night.